everyone, I'm Anand Patel and I'm presenting on test-driven development. So what is test-driven development? Test-driven development, or TDD for short, is the process of developing tests that satisfy the requirements of a project before developing production code. And this concept is rooted in the extreme programming concept, in the planning and feedback loops where you develop tests, continuously develop tests and code to satisfy requirements. In other words, TDD ensures that functionality for a project's requirements meets specifications. This is all about aiming for the expected behavior and results of a requirement before reaching an optimal solution. This differs from traditional testing because it should theoretically provide 100% code coverage for your system. Whereas in other cases, tests can be developed after production code is made. So the 3 laws of test-driven development as spoken by Robert Martin. You're not allowed to write any production code unless it is to make a failing unit test pass. So in other words, you're only going to write code that satisfies a test requirement, the requirements to pass a test. Next, you're not allowed to write any more of a unit test than is sufficient to fail. And compilation failures are failures. And finally, you're not allowed to write any more production code than is sufficient to pass the one failing unit test. So here's a cartoon about test-driven development which demonstrates the concept of testing before anything of value is built. So in this cartoon you see from the left to the right, they're going to build a bridge, but they're testing to see that it fails before anything is built. So this may not work in every type of project, but in software projects, they develop the tests that satisfy requirements before building any production code. So how to test in test-driven development? Test-driven development is a cyclical process designed to develop code that passes tests. This process has 3 main phases. The first is creating a precise test. Then you run that test to see if it passes. If it passes, you'll write some more tests. If that test fails, you'll write some code that you will believe will cause that test to pass. Then you'll rerun all the tests to see if anything fails. If it fails, you'll write some more code to get the test to pass. If it passes and all the tests succeed, you'll go ahead and clean up and refactor code, and the loop will start again. Through this process, the source code is verified by automated tests and all such tests pass. The code will contain no duplication. The code expresses separately each distinct idea or responsibility. And the code is composed of the minimum number of components, like classes or methods, compatible with the first 3 criteria. In essence, this development process requires a feedback loop between all 3 phases of writing tests, coding, and refactoring to produce production quality code. Test-driven development ensures that every line of code has an associated unit test that is repeatedly run against the code until each block of code functions exactly as the requirements dictate. Unlike unit testing that focuses only on testing the functions, classes, and procedures, test-driven development drives the complete development of the application. Therefore, you can also write functional and acceptance tests first. The full benefit of test-driven development is realized when these tests are run continuously. So, pause and think. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of using test-driven development? Okay, now to give you some time to think of the main advantages and disadvantages, uh, I hope you've thought of one of the main disadvantages, which is testing takes a significant portion of time and money before anything of value is produced. So this cartoon kind of actually describes that, in which a developer here wrote 10,000 lines of code, did all of these assemblies and wrote scripts, and then he's ready to begin developing after all of his tests are done. So why not use TDD? Test-driven development is inherently a slow process because it relies on testing before production code is developed. The second point I make is that test-driven development requires everyone to practice it to realize the full benefits. It can complicate the process if some on the team are writing tests after code is developed and not before. And in my opinion, the biggest disadvantage is maintaining these tests require maintenance as well as the code. You have to ensure that the tests meet the requirements as well as the code. Some other factors to consider. Individuals may forget to run tests frequently. They may write too many tests at once. They may write tests that are too large or overly trivial, or write tests for trivial code. And some disadvantages: teams may use TDD inconsistently, like I said before, and they may fail to maintain the entire suite of tests, leading to overly long runtimes. So you may run into the problem you have way too many tests and it takes too long to run all of them. And this can also happen. Another disadvantage is that teams may abandon test-driven development test suites because it takes too long. So why use test-driven development? Well, it has several benefits. The main is that it produces robust code that is flexible and extensible. So by design, test-driven development encourages development of code that is continuously refactored, so it is easily tested. And changes can be made with minimal risk of breaking your entire system, as it will be much easier to figure out the point of failure, because everything has an associated test. In addition, all code is produced will inherently satisfy the requirements because you are developing code that is defined by tests that is defined by the requirements. So because the resulting code is robust, test-driven development can enable faster innovation and continuous delivery. Some other advantages are tests themselves are tested, with developers verifying that each new test fails as part of the TDD process. And there's little to no wasted effort because you only write code for the feature needed to satisfy your requirements. So in other words, you don't create features that are not in your requirements because you don't have tests for those requirements. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation on test-driven development. And here are my sources